Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, or good afternoon. I'm Matthew Alex. I think we're going to have a presentation. I think it's going to get pulled up here. First of all, we're not going to do this traditionally. We're not doing pre-pandemic where we're just lecturing to you guys about what we think is right or what we think is wrong. So the first thing we did is, this presentation is accessible to you. It can be accessed at any point in time. Because the way that we want to educate kids, the way we want to change the world, is you need to empower people to learn at their own time, at their own pace, and about what they want to learn. So this presentation that you're seeing, you can actually pull up. If you go tinyurl.com/GFL21, you can actually put it on your phone, your laptop, your iPad, and we encourage you to review it, to look at it. But we're not necessarily going to present off of it. We're not going to show you and tell you everything that tells you on the slide. We're going to have a dialogue with you. And I'm really excited about this discussion. We have some amazing panelists here. You know, we did some prep discussions, and I always ask the question, what's your why? You know, for me, I've been in higher ed for about 30 years. 20 years of that, I've been consulting. My why is changing the way we educate. Why? Because for me, there was a heartbreak. There was a heartbreak that the way the kids learn, the way I learned, wasn't necessarily taught properly, and we lose kids. If you were to ask my parents growing up if I would be successful, if I'd be a partner at Deloitte, if I can run a company, if I can lead people through different places, that I would be consulting the top universities in the country, they wouldn't say I was the case. And that's what I want to do. My why is not losing anyone during this journey. And that's the part I wanted to. So I'm going to ask each one of our guests. I'm going to start with James. James, what is your why?
Thank you for asking. So first of all, my name is James Knight. I live in North Carolina. So my why started, well, I've been in education for about 13 years, but I think I really got into my why about four years ago when I went to the barbershop. So what happened at the barbershop is, if you know anything about black men in their hair, we really, we hold barbershops very seriously. And so my barber I've known him for about 25 years. We went to high school together, and he's about 2 years younger than me. And my heartbreak was learning in the barber chair that he had a very different educational experience than I did, and we went to the same school. And so what that looked like is that I was and I had parents who advocated for me to be in honors classes and college prep courses and things like that, because I was, even though I registered for those before 9th grade, when I got to school, the counselor put me in other classes because she assumed that I had been put in those classes by mistake. Luckily, I had a mother who could get off work and could advocate for me to be put back in those honors classes and back in those college prep courses that I've waited, that colleges look at. But my barber did not have the same opportunity because his mother worked a job where they didn't give her flexibility. And so some of the things that were afforded to me were not afforded to him. We're the same skin color, we came from the same area, but we went to the same school and had completely different educational experiences that prepared us in different ways. And he would tell you, if he were here, that he was not prepared for life the same way that I was. And I just felt that was very inequitable, and it broke my heart that this guy that I've known for years did not have the same educational opportunity that I did because he was not found worthy. Neither one of us was found worthy, but I had a mother who said, you're not going to look at my child that way because of the color of his skin. And so now my why is to provide equitable experiences for each and every child. Instead of trying to figure out how to give all children the same thing, I want to try to figure out how to give each and every child exactly what they need.
So Ivan, the question goes to you. What is your why?
Of course.
And of course, introduce yourself. So as you see, we have our slides up here. But go ahead and...
Yes, sure. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so no need for it.
I'm going to start first just for one disclaimer. I'm from Mexico, so please excuse me for my English, okay? How am I here and how I'm fully committed to make my country better through education for our students. I spent more than 20 years in a telecom company. It was the first select, the first competitor with the incumbent. And I have the opportunity to make as a startup and really change Mexico in that area. And then I was the privilege to be invited to work for Loret in Mexico. And imagine, right, it's me in telecom and now education, piece of cake. All the guys that came from that company to Loret, we think the same, like saying education is easy, right? It's just teaching and learning the guys, and it has been the most difficult job. You know now why I'm trying to do this is we are serving the low or medium-low socioeconomical population, and most of our students are working adults, right? So it has been very difficult for them to achieve and reach this kind of education. And now with the pandemic, they were struggling, right? Because the lack of opportunities that we have and the lack of capabilities that we have as a university. And we promise ourselves that we will keep these guys and trying to continue with their education. We were able to do it, but now we are, as you said, right? We are reimagining the future and see how we can learn from this pandemic and try to do something more better. So this is what I'm looking for, and I really want to make a better world for these guys. We are on serving most of the young population, right? We are the largest university in Mexico. We have 220,000 students, and that is only the 10% of the whole population that are studying on higher education. It's 2 million, 2.5 million, right? We have at least 50% more that has not been served, and they don't have the opportunity to study. So we think that we need starting to change our business model. This is our major challenge, right? We are stuck in the present, and we really need to look how we can help more these guys. Thanks.
Thank you. So we got access and equity on James's, and the social economical pieces that we got to think about. In this discussion, in our panel today, we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about the future of work, the future of learning, and the future of students. Because we believe it's an educational value chain. We have to think about the educational value chain as we move forward. So before we go to that, I want to bring Michael to this discussion. Go ahead, Michael. What is your why? What's your passion, and what do you really push forward on?
Yeah, so everyone can hear me. Yeah, mic is working great. My name is Michael Karsh. I am a co-founder and executive producer at Edios Media. You might be thinking on this panel, why would there be someone from a media company on here? So quickly what we do so it makes sense is we actually work with organizations, institutions, instructors, authors, whoever is out there trying to teach, and we help them develop and produce their content for video. So a lot of asynchronous learning, courses, certificate trainings, all of those things. So we are a video production agency that specializes in development and production of educational content. Now my why is, my background is a little bit different. I spent the first half of my career in Hollywood. I developed kids programs, I worked in feature films, I worked in network television, and several years ago I got caught up in the startup boom and ended up at a company that was doing online education workshops. And so I ended up working with some of these great minds and helping them craft their knowledge, their skill set, their expertise into something that was something that learners would engage with, right? And so my big why was in that transition from Hollywood into online education, I realized that the development process wasn't that different. I think that, and I think this was my big learning, is that a lot of asynchronous learning or a lot of online education that you see nowadays doesn't take narrative and story into account. They're not intentionally developing for the medium of video. And so my big why is, it's really not that different when you're trying to educate and entertain. You have to engage. And so that was the big why for us and for EDOS Media, is that you have to be super intentional in the development process when you're trying to create an engaging learning experience through video. And that's what we try to do with all of our clients.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. So one of the things that we want to do this, we also want this to be interactive. So I've asked Raphael, you can raise your hand, if you have a question, because what we want to talk about is going to be uncomfortable conversations. I'm going to ask them to scroll the presentation. I'm going to start with 3 numbers. So Raphael is here. We'd love for your feedback. We'd love for your topics. We'd love for you to ask us questions. I'd love for us to be challenged up here. I start with number 3, 41, and 400. Let me give you the first one. 3 represents the hats that students wear. They're consumers, they're customers, and they're products. And that's how we have to interact with them. If you act as just learners, you teach them what we've always been teaching them. One thing that we learned in the pandemic is that everyone learns differently. Everyone has different needs as a consumer, as a customer in terms of higher ed, and as a product. This is who they represent as you move forward. 41 is actually 4.1. If you want to scroll up, you can. 4.1. That's 4.1 million new opportunities. In a Gartner survey, when we think about future of work, 2.8 million new jobs will be created. Everyone is afraid that jobs are going to go away. Actually, it's 2.8 million new jobs. Now, 1.3 million jobs will go away. That's where it comes up to 4.1 new opportunities to reskill, to retrain, to think about those things. 400 is the speed of how data is processing through the systems that you use. So it's 400 times the blink of an eye. So go ahead and blink your eye and think about data processing at 400 times the speed. Just open up your iPhone and let it look at you to decide if it's in. Think about how fast that data is happening. Yet, in our classrooms, in our educational ecosystem, we still act like we're in the 1990s. Things that we should be doing has to be thought of that way. So when we think about the 3 elements of future of work, future of student, future of learning, you got to understand that there's this dynamic of the 3, the 4.1, and the 400 times a blink of an eye. So as we go through this discussion, we're going to go through this presentation. I'm going to ask my colleagues here to speak about it. If you want to just go up, you can. This is an uncomfortable conversation for all traditional educators. You will be uncomfortable because what we've done is not what we should do moving forward. We've been sitting here, and I almost felt like I was going back to pre-pandemic, where you're sitting there and you're listening to me. That has to change. We have Clubhouse, we have green rooms, we have all these things. And yet, our conferences look like this. Time to change. It will only change if you recognize it has to change. That's why the media side is really important. That's why the K through 12 is really important. That's why the universities are important. Because we have to come together. So we're going to talk about topics that, it's going to get you uncomfortable. That's why I want that microphone to go to you guys, because when you're uncomfortable, I want you to ask us a question. I want you to say, you know what, I think you're wrong. Because that's how you learn. It's when you unlearn what you know. And I'm excited about that discussion. So if you haven't felt that I'm passionate about it, I can meet you afterwards and have a cup of coffee and you can hear my passion. But I'm excited about this. So this is a piece. Let's go up to the next slide. And we can keep going. In the pre-pandemic world, we've been talking about cost pressures. We've been talking about the size of a room. We're talking about the standardized tests that we are giving. How many of you guys think that is the only issues we have? So now let's think about what the pandemic did. And I'm going to have my colleagues go through this a little bit with me. Let's go up to the next slide. The pandemic has done three things. It's accelerated the fourth industrial revolution. You guys have already experienced the third one. That's when the internet came in and it changed your life. What you guys all thought was normal, it is not normal anymore. We're in the fourth industrial revolution and we are going to start changing it a little bit differently. Then we're going to talk about being digital. What does it really mean to be digital? And then also the license change. So I'm going to ask my colleagues here, when we think about change, what are the things that you think in K through 12 that are going to change now that we have this technology, now that we've gone through the pandemic? Give me a little bit of your thought.
So, hello, yeah, my mic wasn't working earlier.
Yeah, I'll get you there.
Can you all hear me?
Very interesting to hear. No?
Hello. Okay, so I've always been a believer since the pandemic started. I believe that the pandemic did not cause these things that we're seeing or these issues that we're seeing. What it did was exacerbate them, and it forced people to acknowledge that they exist. So for instance, I've always worked in rural areas. I've always worked in schools where minorities were the majority in a school. And you can always tell because of the funding, and you can always tell because of the access. Now, we've been talking about, I've been in education for 13 years, and we've been talking about how our kids in our schools that I've worked at need access to technology. They need better computers. We need one-to-one laptop programs, and there was never any money. So then fast forward to the pandemic, and you want schools to reopen, and you're realizing, oh, a lot of these kids live in what we call an internet desert. Well, we've been telling you that for years, and now because children in these different zip codes now have these same access problems that the other zip codes were having, now everybody has to listen. And so for me, the pandemic has been some sort of an equalizer, because now everybody's having the same problems, so now everybody has to pay attention and do something about them. And so I think what has to happen is the same way that we got hotspots to people that did not have internet during the pandemic, we have to find a way to get those things to them after the pandemic, because they're still going to have the same internet access issues that we had pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. And so we pushed to have these things so that students wouldn't have any excuses for why they couldn't get the work done. But instead of thinking about it in a punitive way, we now have to think about it in a proactive way so that the kids can learn. It's not just about finding a way to keep them from making excuses, but it's about finding a way to keep them from being left out and to keep them from being excluded. I also think that one thing that has to change now that we have access to some of these digital things because of the pandemic is we have to keep these things in order to keep from doing exclusionary practices. So for me, I do a lot of equity work. So African American students in America make up 16% of school enrollment, but they make up at least 42% of suspensions in school and out of school suspension. That is an exclusionary practice that really weeds out a lot of minority students. But now I've been able to say for this school year that we have successfully had no suspensions, because even if I have to even if we have to take a student out of the environment for their safety, I am still holding them accountable because I know they have a hotspot. I know they have a computer that we gave them, because before there was no money for a one-to-one laptop program, but all of a sudden there was money for everybody to get a laptop. Then we said, okay, we got the laptops, you should do your work. Well, what does that matter if I live with 3 other siblings and we have one hotspot that has limited data and everybody's trying to do their homework at the same time? Well, now that we have multiple hotspots in these areas and you have these towers and we have these other places that they can get to access this internet, I should not be suspending students. What I should be saying is you could be at home on virtual learning and we can do some type of reflection practices. We can do some type of restorative things to keep you from having suspensions on your record, but also hold you accountable for your behavior and then bringing you back into the fold so that we can restore you, so we can send the message that I do not appreciate your behavior, but I appreciate you as the person. Because people should have to apologize for what they do, but they should never apologize for who they are. And I think this is one thing that we have to think about in K-12 when we think about these exclusionary practices, these the ways that we instruct students, because everybody does not learn the same way. And these digital things that we have access to now have required and allowed us the opportunity to serve students in multiple ways. Now, it's a lot of work on the front end, but if you do the work on the front end, what you'll notice is that the dividends that you get on the back end are exponentially greater than anything we could have done before.
Thank you, James. So the question I always ask is, how many of you think that a pen and paper or pen and a pencil is needed? How many of you guys think that is needed for education? Nobody? All right. Got one person who thinks that pen and paper is needed. How many think that Wi-Fi is needed for education? Can you guys hear me or not? So a Wi-Fi is needed. How many think that access to devices is needed for education? All of you guys think that. Yet, the way that we actually educate isn't using all those things. It's still using the 1990s element of it. So as teachers, and as administrators, and as university officials, you have to start thinking, how do I change my curriculum? How do I start using the technology that's there? So I want to move this to Michael, because one of the things that we have to recognize is we have 5 learning chemistries. Some of us learn visually, some of us learn auditory, some learn through contextual, some learn through I'm blanking on here. We learn through all these different learning chemistries that really allow us to do it. Yet today, we're still in a one-on-one and a conversation type of conversation. But yet, we now have media. I'd love your thought on how do we get education to navigate on a path with more media?
I mean, it's a great question. It's something that we think about all the time. And you know, it's often when we work with new clients, whether they're organizations or institutions or, you know, I think what we have to consider is that learners, people's relationship to video is just astronomically different now than it was even 5 years ago, than it was 10 years ago. The way we consume content is drastically different. So how are we as educators, how are we as teachers reaching those students where they are? So a lot of times, if you're asking, you know, someone is sitting at their computer and they're being forced to learn like everybody was the last 15 months, how are you competing against TikTok? How are you competing against Netflix? How are you competing against the 17 other tabs that are on their screen or on their device? And so, again, where my mind goes is we need to create education that speaks to the learner and distinctly to their needs, wants, fears, desires, all of those things. And we need to do it in a way that has a certain quality and a certain expectation that those same learners have when they're consuming other content. So that's a lot of the things that we think about. And so what does that look like? I think that still remains to be seen. You know, I hear all the time, like, what's the Netflix for education, right? What would something like that look like? Or an education experience through video could be so drastically different from one experience to the next. Trying to do Zoom school is very, very difficult. But having a flexible course or training or whatever that is flexible to the learner and speaks directly to the learner's needs, that might be something that has very positive outcomes. And so these are the different sort of formats that we need to think about when it comes to the future of education.
Yeah. So when we think about that, and think, the way we always have to recognize is that the way we educate has to rival what our kids are using right now. They're in Fortnite and they're in gaming. We have to rival the gaming element of it. We have to rival the ability to tailor your education. The educational marketplace is going to become even more predominant as you move forward. If you are still going to be in a classroom setting, teaching the same books that was written 5 years, 10 years ago, you've already lost your kids. Because your kids are ahead of you. And I recognized this when I took my son and I said, I'm going to take you to the library. I want you to go research this. He said, Dad, I don't need to go to the library. I have Google. And his presentation was more in depth than anything that I would have produced at that age. And that's what being digital is. And I put up here, we have to move to a digital culture. We got to use the utilization of digital. You got to have digital capability. One of the things that we recognized during the pandemic, people weren't digital. We had universities stop and have to teach their teachers how to use their LMS. I would love Ivan, you're from a university setting. What was the challenges you saw in the digital world during the pandemic?
Of course. Let me just tell you something before I started. I was 4 years for now. I was here in Las Vegas for the Consuming Electronic Summit. Have you heard of that? The CES, right? It was the only time I have been there. But on the last day, there are just tracks for 3 major industries: government, health, and education. And I heard that guy, and is this what you say, that our kids are ahead of us? That was one guy showing us a software, like a game, for kids on kinder, right? And he was teach them to code, right? By doing games, right? Is having an egg and put it in a tree, and then that tree will that egg is a dragon. And he says, I was doing the prototype with my nephew that was 5 years old or something, and he says, the level 1, he spent 3 minutes to put the egg from the floor to the tree. You know, what do you think that this guy made on the next 3 minutes? So, okay, the level 2. No, he was on level 6, right? On the second time on the following 3 minutes, he moved from level 1 to level 2 to level 6. On level 6, he was flying the dragon. He was battling with the other guys, right? A kid of 6. He says that he was expecting that by 2020, right, coding will be the 5th subject, the basic subject, equal to add, subtract, read, and write. Do you believe in that? Do you recognize that coding or having some capabilities for digital will be a very basic way for the human beings, right? I'm saying is IT will disappear, right? Like I have been joking always saying that because I was challenging my industry on that is I don't see CIOs in the near future in the companies, right? It's like you don't have a chief water officer or a chief power officer or a chief telephone officer, right? It's utility. It's something that you make for granted. So that capabilities is what we are needed. Maybe we don't see because we are not from this era, right? But we need to now help our next generation and help them to advance a much more speed, because this is what the world would need, right? the pandemic, I'm blessed, I'm very grateful with the pandemic because that made us to challenge ourselves in our business model. I'm not shy to say that we are a for-profit organization. We make money. We want to make money. But so can you imagine that we have the more aspirational university in Mexico for the medium-low socioeconomic level, right? And we are making a very good money with that university. They are one of the best business units in the world, making is much more profitable than the average in the whole industry. So why to change, right? But then the pandemic came, and we were worried that if we cannot continue delivering the service, which is having the classes, we need to, how you say, refund, giving the money to our students because we are not they are not obtaining the classes. So we need to put everything from moving from in presence to online in 1 week, and we were able to do it. But then after that, we opened the eyes for a lot of possibilities, right? And I'll just give you one example. And sorry to insist on that. We are serving the low socioeconomic level. There are campus in our system with the Unitec. This is the university, where the neighborhoods are very dangerous, right? So we cannot ask our student to stay in the campus. We need to make them leave at 5 p.m., right? If it's 6 p.m., most likely they will be robbed, right? Or they will have something. They cannot bring with them their computers, right? Because they will be robbed in the public transport. So now with this possibility, we are having the possibility to extend for them the class hours. Remember that like 2/3 of our student population are working adults. If they miss the classes, it's very difficult for them to replace because they are working. So now with these digital capabilities, we are delivering the service at their pace, as you said, right? So we are democratizing that the education for them. Is you can do it wherever you are, whenever you can, right? Also, most of our teachers are part-time employees. They have another employment. So there are some times where they are not being willing to attend the campus. Now they can deliver wherever they are, they can deliver the classes. So this is a new era. And I think that we need to embrace that and promote that, because the next generation, they are born and they are digital native, and they are expecting that will be the way to work. Have you heard the gig economy, the concept of the gig economy? No? Gig economy? No? They are saying that the next generation, the millennials, they are not going to look for jobs. They are going to look for missions or for challenges, right? They are expecting to get the specific competencies in order to do that and jumping for the next challenge. I'm living that with my older children. He was an economist, right? He was graduated. He gave me his diploma, and now he's a chef, right? And he's very, very, very happy with that, and he's looking for other things.
And we're going to get into the future of students. So if we want to just go to the future of student slide, which is just up. So we're going to talk about future of student, because I think future of student is who you should be serving. And when we think about future of student, if you want to just keep going up, you can keep going up. Yep, one more. There you go. So when we think about future of student, they're consumers, customers, and products, like I said. Their digital expectations, as Ivan said, is really important. They're going to expect something much different than what we're giving them right now. It's accelerated in a very value-based. When he said his son is looking for purpose, it's value purpose. There is a social empowerment that we have to look at. And there is a digital culture we look into. So the question that we always need to ask with the students is, are we preparing them for the next generation? Or are you just preparing them so that they could take an exam? Are you preparing them to learn the what instead of the how? Right now, get uncomfortable, because you all have been teaching the what. Teaching a grade, getting to a GPA, getting to a test score. I hate to say this, but it's all going to go away. We are going to look at students at a much more competency-based. Southern New Hampshire University is already starting to do competency-based education. Because if you think about what we've been teaching on an earn it model. You have to earn a GPA, you have to earn a grade. And that grade is not even equal. An A in one class is not the same as another class. And yet, that's how your students get admitted to a university. Unyoked, unnormalized. Think about those type of questions. So imagine if we had a different type of educational system for our students. These are just some of the elements of it. And what I want to talk about with James is these students, it's all about access. And I know you have an element. When we think about students, we have to talk about access. And I'd love for you to talk through the access element of it.
Yeah, so one of the things that I do in addition to education is I work with East Carolina University in something called the Rural Education Institute. And what we talk about is how to work with teachers to have different uncomfortable conversations with them to help them sit in certain things that they have been doing that have colored and created barriers for them teaching students in rural areas and students of color. And one of the things that we do is we get them to sit down and understand certain implicit biases that they may have. And so what this idea of digital access helps them understand is that a lot of our students that they thought were being lazy or that had a deficit mindset when it came to work, what they really realized is that they were not paying attention to the stories of these students and what these students were going through. So for instance, with Zoom, I've had a couple of students or a couple of teachers who have tried to refer certain students to DSS or refer certain parents to DSS because they didn't like what their backgrounds looked like. And then they would ask me, well, how am I going to get these kids to turn on their cameras? Well, ma'am, because you keep jumping in their business, they're not going to turn on their camera for you until they can trust you, because the last time they did that, you called DSS on their parents because you didn't like what their living room looked like, or you thought because they were holding their baby brother in their lap that their parents were not caring about their education. And so this idea of digital access helps us to understand that while you have access to your students in a different way, you also have a responsibility to understand them before you judge them and before you make assumptions that could change the trajectory of their lives and that could further traumatize them. And the other thing that the idea of access, period, is helping students to access subjects in a different way. Because one thing in the area of math and science, we realize, and a lot of research is showing, that when students become more math literate, it helps them to become financially independent. It helps them become better contributors to society because they understand the idea of credit. They understand they won't go to colleges like the one I went to where they have these tables where people, a city card is trying to get you to get a credit card your freshman year when you have no experience with credit. And they will understand those different things because the idea of culturally relevant teaching teaches you about those different types of things, and it gives you access to information through the way you live your life while preparing you for the test you have to take, but also preparing you for what's coming next. And I think what we've been doing for years is we've been trying to prepare students for the careers that are existing now and not preparing them with the idea that there are other careers that are being invented as we sit in these chairs right now, or that they have the capacity to invent careers where they see none. And so I think the idea of digital access gives them the idea about critical thinking, forces critical thinking, and it forces critical conversation and collaboration in preparation for these careers that are going to be created by other people that they can be prepared for, or that our children themselves will create because they have such access to digital technologies, and they have such a mind to do these things.
Thank you, James. If we could just go to the future of learning slide really quick, because I want Michael to speak a little bit about this. When we think about future of learning, we got to rethink how we educate. Remember the 5 learning chemistries. We also need to talk about storytelling, and also what you call the 60-year curriculum. Can you speak to those 2 things really quick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it sort of even almost follows up on what James was saying, because so we worked, we had the privilege of, at my company, producing, you guys have probably heard of them, they're called these career certificates from Grow with Google, where they launch these certificate programs where you commit a certain amount of learning, and the idea is you can come with no knowledge of this topic, and by the end, theoretically have enough information to be able to get an entry-level job. We did the first one in IT. And the whole thing about that was there's all these open jobs available in IT, but IT is something that is trainable. It's learnable in, say, 8 to 10 months' time. You don't have to go to a 4-year university. And then we went on and produced 3 more. So we've done now 5 of these. In IT, there's one in Python programming, there was one in UX, one in program management, and one in data analysis. And what I found so interesting is something that James had said, that a lot of these roles just didn't even exist 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. There was no UX, right? Like there was no entry-level UX role. I mean, obviously the different avenues and careers available in IT now, a lot of those didn't exist 20 years ago. And I say this because what I found fascinating is when we worked intently, very deeply with internal subject matters at Google, and there was a lot of research involved here, is that some of the key traits that they wanted to find in these students that made them perfect for these entry-level roles, whether or not they had any background in IT, programming, UX design, these were things such as curiosity, such as grit, such as perseverance, right? And those are not necessarily things you can teach. Or of course you can teach, but have to be taught in our elementary schools, in our middle schools, in our high schools. And I found that fascinating because, I remember we were doing the project manager one, and we ended up interviewing someone that is now a project manager at Google. She was a bartender, and she managed a bar, but she had the skill set to be able to, right.
Yep.
And I found that really fascinating, just kind of adding on to what you said. Now, that actually speaks also very, very specifically to this storytelling idea, because I'll reference it in these Google certs that we worked on, because I believe the success of these, a big part of the success of these is because of the intention to storytelling. It was very clear who the learners were for these career certificates, and they've done quite well. They're global, hundreds of thousands of learners. I think they said recently for the IT one that there was a report that 82% of the learners believe that the IT cert benefited their career or advanced them in their careers. And so when we think of storytelling in a case like this, is who is the learner? Where are they at now? What is their status quo? And these things were geared towards underrepresented communities, people who didn't have access to a 4-year degree a lot of times for whatever reason, and understanding where are they at, what are their struggles, kind of what James is saying, maybe they don't, they need that flexibility to be able to learn after work, or they just don't have the same sort of, they're working multiple jobs or they have families at home, whatever those reasons are. So understanding who that learner is, And then in a case like this, in the Google cert, all of the courses were taught by Google employees. There was a lot of representation across all the course instructors. These were people that had started in the same fields these people were trying to get roles in. Throughout the instruction, what they would tell the learners some of their struggles that they had in some of the curriculum that they were learning. We also we did interviews across the board. I think we had 50 interviews in the IT cert of all these different people at Google talking about how they started as an entry-level IT and what they're doing now, what a day-to-day might look like in their job. Or I think we even had this amazing conversation of a woman who's at a very high level in security at Google, talking about how every single day she feels imposter syndrome. You know, so like those kind of things, to be able to hear from people that you might look up to from an organization you might want to work at one day, that connects with the learner. That's storytelling.
So when you think about storytelling, is that more of a design thinking model of understanding what the journey of that learner is, and then you design to that element? Because if you do, then you have to look at what their expectations are. You have to recognize that we are living in a polysynchronous learning model, meaning you need to be able to teach synchronously, just like you're doing right now, as well as asynchronously. That means on-demand learning through your learning media, and allowing for it to be both at the time of when that person needs it. And I think it's a big driver. So when we think about journey mapping and things like that, we do look at the consumer, the customer, and the product. And I know you wanted to chime in. Go ahead and talk a little bit about that. And we do have a time check.
Yes.
We got 5 minutes.
5
before
minutes.
we
Yes,
get-
yes.
So,
Oh, we're almost done.
It's the first time that I heard from these guys the concept of our students being a product, right? I need to come to the States to hear that, because I has not been willing to convince my colleagues there in Mexico that we need to rethink that our students are not only our customers, right? It's our best product. And this is aligned with the concept of our founder, right? He says that if our students succeed, our societies will benefit, right? So if we think like that our students is more than just a customer, is something much more important, is our best product for the society, for the humanity, right? We will think in a better way that what we need to give them. And this is when we start to think that there's no need for just one degree for life. We need to help them to have the best competences, and then for them to choose what will be the next mission for them, which is the future of this way of working. So I just want, like, for my final conversation with you, take this message for you, right? Is think that this is our best product that we can give them to the world, our students. Thanks.
So the thing that I would talk about is, and because I consult universities, I'm always talking about majors should not default you. I'm a criminal justice major. I design the most complex student systems in the country at the top schools. I've never coded in my life. I'm a criminal justice major, and a proud one. Yet our majors default you into what you think you should be doing. And the reality of it is, you should not be defaulted, because that's just what you learned. It's how you learned is what that major really represents. And we're going to talk about, if you want to just move up on the future of work element of it, I think it's a really important thing to understand. Design thinking is an important element as you think through it. When we think about future work, and each of them has spoken about it, work is going to change. My daughter is going into college. I've already told her, when you come out, the job that you will take on doesn't exist today. So I don't care what major you are. Wake up in the morning with a major you want to go and learn. Because that learning is going to take you into work. Universities, K through 12, have to rethink. How does their students, their product, become a part of that? And so it's a really what I would call a driven ecosystem. Ivan talked about the gig economy. So he spoiled my slide here a little bit. But the gig economy We're already in it. Uber's already here. Upwork is already here. Talent exchange is already happening. I run a consulting company. When I ran it at Deloitte, I had 40 people. When I run it now, I have 10. I'm as powerful as Deloitte with 40. Why? Because my talent exchange is nimble. It's agile. Pandemic has also taught us, bring your borders down. I don't need to work in the 60-mile element of my workspace. So what happens? Work, you get better people. You get better automation. All those things are really important as you move forward. I know we're going to come to a close, and I want James to talk through the last slide, which is the human-centric element. So if you want to just go to there's two mindsets. You can stay in the current mindset you want, which we call an institutional mindset, which is focused on people, technology, processes. You go home and you can be institutional-centric. Or, if you go to the next slide, and I'm going to let James talk a little bit about this, and we'll close it up from that way. If you want to just go up one more slide.
Thank you. So the idea of being human-centric is what we in the education world will talk about, having student-centered learning environments. And those types of environments would require us as the adult to relinquish our control. And I think with these gentlemen who are entrepreneurs and they're company owners, I think what helps them be successful is that they're willing to relinquish some of their control and let their constituents and the people that work for them tell them what they need. And I was listening to Michael talk about the idea of storytelling as connecting with our students, and what we talk about in the education world is social emotional learning, and how we are tapping into the human side of our students because we want our students to be holistically well. And through that, we realize, and we have a phrase in the education world called doing Maslow's before Bloom's, because we make sure that their basic needs are met. And so we allow them to tell us these stories that are keeping them from doing the work that we are requiring them to do, so that we can learn how to meet their needs. So then, once their needs are met, they are able to perform for us the way we need to perform. They're able to produce for us the way we need them to produce. And so I think the idea of being human-centric is me talking to my 6th through 8th graders at Welcome Middle School in Greenville, North Carolina, and saying, hey, you're not performing at your best today. What is it that you need? Not, you need to go in there and do your work before I send you home. No, it's me asking this student, what's going on? What do you need? And seeing if I can meet that need, because once they see that I'm willing to meet their needs, then they're willing to meet mine. And then they're willing to be successful, because if it's about the children, and we say it's about the children, I believe that we believe that when we say it, then we should be willing to remove some of these barriers for these students, because they're telling this to us. Now, how do we do that is we become human-centric, because that allows them to trust us, that when they give us a need that they have, they believe and trust that we're going to work to meet that need. And even if we're not successful, they will know, and they will have some assurance that we have at least given every effort that we can and done everything within our power to meet their needs as humans, and not just try to process them through the school system and then say, well, I taught it, it was up to you to get it. But human-centric requires you to think beyond me teaching it, but making sure I do everything that I can to make sure you learned it, because there is a difference.
So, there's a last slide here, and we're already running out of time. There's two questions that I really want to ask. We already went through the slides. This slide's available to you. You can access at any point in time. The two questions is, what do you continue to do previously? How do you continue to foster what you do and that has worked well? But what do you leave behind? If you think about those two things, this is when you will start to become transformative. So I want to say, first of all, thanks to the gentleman up here. We just met last week on Zoom, and we went through this. So this is as quick and nimble of a presentation as we can give. We hope that you guys see it. I'll leave you with a quote right on the last one, if he wants to show it up here. It basically is saying that you can design today for tomorrow, or you can design tomorrow today. If you focus on tomorrow, you will design a better tomorrow. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
That's a good job.
Great. Nice job.